The miracle that broke everything I thought I knew. This miracle happened at exactly 3:17 a.m. The numbers glowed pale blue on the hospital clock, humming softly above a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and midnight prayers. It was so quiet that even the machines seemed to hold their breath. I remember thinking how fragile silence can be, how easily it shatters when pain enters the room. And then he came. Not in thunder, not in lightning, but in a stillness that pressed against my ribs until it felt like time itself was listening. I used to think I knew how God worked. I thought faith was a set of steps, a formula for answered prayers. But that night, something inside me broke open, something that had been locked behind years of polite religion and unspoken doubt. It wasn't the first miracle I'd witnessed. It was just the first one I recognized. For months, I had been drifting through prayers that felt mechanical. You know that feeling when you speak to heaven and the words hit the ceiling like birds that can't find the sky? That was me. Every Sunday, I smiled through the hymns, raised my hands because everyone else did, and told myself that maybe God was busy somewhere else. I believed in him, yes, but only the way you believe in distant stars, real but too far away to warm you. Then came that Tuesday night. My phone rang just past midnight. It was Sarah, my neighbor, the one who always left flowers by her window, the one whose laugh used to fill the hallway like music. But this time, her voice was jagged, raw. Her little boy had collapsed with a fever so high the doctors weren't sure he'd make it till morning. "Please," she said, "just pray." I could hear the machines in the background, the chaos of rushing footsteps. Something inside me said, "Go." I didn't even think about what to say. I just grabbed my keys and drove through the empty streets, headlights carving tunnels through the fog. The city was asleep, but heaven wasn't. I didn't realize then that I was being summoned not by Sarah, but by the same God I'd been doubting. When I entered that sterile room, I saw him small, pale, burning with fever. His tiny chest rose and fell under a thin blanket, wires curling around him like roots of light and fear. Sarah stood by the bed, her hands trembling. "They said he might not make it through the night," she whispered. Her words were sharp enough to cut through my silence. I wanted to say something profound, but nothing came. All I could do was place my hand on that boy's forehead. It wasn't a planned prayer. It was just breath, just a whisper that carried all my broken belief. "Jesus, please." That's all. No eloquence, no formula, just a cry from a heart too tired to pretend. And then something changed. The air in the room thickened. The hum of the machines softened into a rhythm that felt almost alive. The child's body, moments ago, burning, began to cool. The color returned to his cheeks as if someone had painted life back into him. I looked at the monitor. The numbers were stabilizing. The nurse blinked twice, checked the equipment, and ran to get the doctor. Within minutes, the fever was gone. Just gone. Sarah fell to her knees, tears spilling across the sterile tiles, whispering "thank you" again and again. The doctor came, bewildered. They ran tests, drew blood, scanned, measured, and every result came back normal. No infection, no explanation. But I knew. Not because I understood what had happened, but because something inside me whispered, "Pay attention." I drove home with the window cracked open, the night air cold against my skin. The dashboard clock glowed, 3:17 a.m. I couldn't stop staring at it. It felt like a signature, a divine timestamp carved into the fabric of time itself. And as I drove, memories started rising like bubbles from a deep well. The time my mother's biopsy came back clear after weeks of fear. The friend who got the exact job she prayed for the day before eviction. The moment a stranger handed me gas money when my car died on an empty highway. Miracles, tiny, quiet, camouflaged in ordinary days. I'd seen them before. I just hadn't been looking. That realization broke something open in me. Faith, I discovered, isn't about certainty, it's about sight. The kind of sight that sees past circumstance into the invisible fingerprints of God. I began noticing them everywhere, the divine interruptions, the sacred coincidences too precise to be random. The single mother who found rent money folded inside an old coat. The couple who decided not to divorce because a forgotten voicemail reminded them of their wedding vows. The neighbor who got the phone call that saved her life because her alarm failed and made her late. They were everywhere. God was everywhere. And I had been blind. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself waking earlier, watching the sunrise like it was a daily resurrection. The light spilled through my window, and I felt something stirring, an awareness that maybe the miracles were never about the events themselves, but about what they awakened in us. Expectation, wonder, surrender. The quiet courage to believe that heaven still leans close. One morning I opened my Bible and it fell to Mark chapter 16 verse 17, and these signs will accompany those who believe. My breath caught. The verse wasn't new, but the meaning was. The signs were never meant to prove God exists. They were meant to remind us that He's near. That He walks through the hallways of hospitals at 3:17 a.m., that He still whispers into our chaos, that His presence is the pulse beneath every impossible situation. The miracles aren't rare, our recognition of them is. That truth began to rearrange my soul. It was as if every unanswered prayer, every silent night, every season of waiting was being rewritten in light I hadn't seen before. I started keeping a small notebook, writing down moments that once seemed random. The stranger's encouragement, the unexpected provision, the feeling of peace when logic said, panic. Each page became evidence that God had been speaking all along. Sometimes at night, I'd return to that hospital in my mind. The scent of sanitizer, the flicker of fluorescent lights, the way Sarah clung to her child. I'd close my eyes and hear the faint rhythm of the monitor, the heartbeat of mercy. And in that stillness, I'd sense something else. That God hadn't just healed the boy. He'd healed the unbelief that had been growing quietly inside me. The real miracle wasn't the fever breaking, it was my blindness breaking. From then on, 3:17 a.m. became my secret hour of prayer. I didn't set an alarm. I just found myself awake, drawn to the quiet. There's something sacred about those minutes before dawn, when the world is half asleep, and heaven feels only a breath away. I'd sit by the window, whispering the same words I spoke in that hospital. Jesus, please. Sometimes there was no request, just gratitude. Sometimes tears, sometimes silence, but always presence. And in that silence, I began to understand something deeper. Miracles aren't interruptions of natural law. They are the natural language of a supernatural God. They're not proofs for skeptics, but invitations for lovers. Every answered prayer, every unexplainable rescue, every whisper of peace in the middle of panic, they're all the same voice saying, I'm still here. You might think miracles are about power, but they're really about intimacy. They draw us closer to the one who moves unseen, who slips into hospital rooms, who writes His name in the ordinary hours we overlook. That's why I call that night the one that broke everything I thought I knew. Because before it, I believed in miracles the way I believed in history. Something that happened long ago. But after it, I started to believe in a living God whose breath still parts seas inside human hearts. Over time, people began telling me their own stories. A man who felt a hand lift him from wreckage. A woman who heard a voice tell her not to give up 1 second before the phone rang with help. Different stories, same heartbeat. It was as though heaven had been conducting a symphony beneath the noise of our doubts, and we were just beginning to tune in. One night, I sat with Sarah on her porch. Her son was running barefoot in the yard, laughter spilling into the air like music. She looked at me and said, You know, sometimes I forget it even happened. Then I remember the time 3:17 a.m., and I realize God doesn't just heal bodies, He restores moments. I nodded, because I'd learned the same thing. Every miracle is also a memory rewritten, a scar that glows instead of hurts. I started to notice patterns. Miracles always seem to find the cracks, the weak places where control collapses and surrender begins. They prefer the unpolished prayers, the trembling voices, the midnight drives when you don't know what to say. They come quietly, not to perform but to reveal. And when they do, they never just fix circumstances, they reshape souls. I used to chase big moments, dramatic evidence, cinematic signs. But now I know that God hides in the small things, the extra breath you didn't think you'd have, the unexpected kindness, the peace that comes before the answer. He is in the pauses between heartbeats, in the ordinary Tuesdays, in the way morning light touches the floor. Sometimes I wonder if heaven keeps time differently. Maybe 3:17 a.m. wasn't just a moment on a clock, but a doorway one I stepped through without realizing. Because from that night on, the world looked different. The shadows were still there, but they shimmered with hidden meaning. Every ache became an invitation, every delay, a lesson in trust. And every ordinary day carried the quiet possibility of divine interruption. Now, when someone tells me they haven't seen a miracle, I ask them to look again. Look at the breath in your lungs, the friend who didn't give up, the strength that came when you thought you had none. Look at the coincidences too precise to be random, the timing too exact to be luck. Miracles aren't always loud. Sometimes they're disguised as persistence, or laughter, or the calm that settles after tears. I've come to believe that every believer carries an unseen clock, somewhere deep within the moment heaven touched their story and marked it forever. For me, it's 3:17 a.m. For you, it might be another time, another place, another whisper. But the message is the same. God is closer than your next breath. The divine is not delayed, it's disguised. So when the night feels long and your prayers echo back empty, remember this: silence is not absence, waiting is not abandonment. And what feels like stillness may be the moment before the miracle. Keep watching, keep expecting, because the God who moved at 3:17 a.m. still moves now in unseen ways, in unplanned moments, in hearts that dare to believe again. That night didn't just heal a child, it resurrected my faith. It taught me that recognition is the beginning of revelation, that seeing God in the small things prepares you for the greater ones, that miracles are not rewards for holiness, but reflections of His mercy, and that faith isn't a feeling, it's a choice to stay awake, to wonder. Sometimes I still drive past that hospital. The windows glow faintly in the dark, like tiny lanterns suspended between heaven and earth. I park for a moment, close my eyes, and whisper, "Thank you." Not because I need another miracle, but because I finally understand that I'm living inside one. And maybe you are too. Because even now, as you listen, somewhere a clock is turning to 3:17 a.m. again. Somewhere a mother is weeping. Somewhere a prayer is rising. Somewhere a fever is breaking. And someone who thought God was distant is realizing He never left. The same presence that filled that hospital room is moving through the quiet of your room too. It's not a story about me. It's about Him, the God who still breaks through ceilings of doubt, who still turns ordinary nights into holy ground, who still whispers through the silence, "I was here all along." So take a breath. Listen, the next miracle may already be unfolding right here, right now, in the unseen space between your heartbeat and His.